Welcome to the Leadership for Society speaker Series. The theme this year is tensions, business, civic society, and politics. I'm Brian Lowry, professor at the Graduate School of Business at Stanford, and today I'm speaking with Dr. Marcia Chatelain, professor at University of Pennsylvania and Pulitzer Prize-winning author of the book Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America. Great to have you, Marcia.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Brian.
So first, why did you write a book about McDonald's? Tell me about it.
Okay, so I think I spent most of my childhood at McDonald's, if we go hour by hour. And I think that for me, especially teaching African American history, it's so important to have a common table that everyone can sit at, regardless of their background, where they grew up, their own interest in the topic. And when you write a book about McDonald's, everyone has a perspective. Very few people have never been to a McDonald's or don't know what it is. And so for me, I wanted to tell a story about what happens, especially after 1968, to Black politics and the civil rights movement. And one of the things that I observed as someone who's so interested in food studies and food history is that fast food had this really strange emergence in Black communities where they were not only in many ways replacing the state in terms of providing services and community opportunities, but they were using the language of the civil rights struggle to talk about their success. And I thought that was so weird and wildly inappropriate. And so I started to think of like, why is that? Why in my own childhood do I remember going to a Black history themed McDonald's before going to a Black history museum? The first serious engagement I had with Black history was through a competition sponsored by Black franchise owners of McDonald's. And I thought that was really fascinating. And so I started to uncover this weird way that McDonald's enters Black communities at the very moment where people are really trying to discern what the next step in the civil rights struggle would be. And so, in many ways, my research is a civil rights story of McDonald's and a McDonald's story about civil rights.
Got it. So you said what happened after 1968. So what happened in 1968, and how did it change the way McDonald's operated or behaved, or the way they engaged in the communities they were in?
So 1968 is a turning point for many institutions, but specifically after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., you start to see this real question as to what would it really mean to open up opportunity and access? And so for those of us who remember the George Floyd summer, that strange moment where everyone was weighing in on racial justice, whether you asked them or not. And so brands are saying that they want to support Black business, and people are saying they want to be on the right side of history. Well, in 68, King's death doesn't mean the end of the struggle. But what it does mean is it's this ultimate moment in which institutions are starting to say, all right, how are we going to open up the doors of the Ivy League? How are we going to open up these elite institutions? How are we going to open up corporate America? And for McDonald's, as such an important rising business at that time, they really saw a growth opportunity to invest in Black-owned franchises, which were being heavily supported by Nixon's Black capitalism efforts in the White House, the Small Business Administration. Everyone wanted to empower Black communities and businesses. But one of the things that concerns me about that approach in 68 and in 2020 is that it often doesn't actually attend to the issues that cause the unrest. So, Black business is not the answer to unequal housing, unequal schooling, lack of wages, unemployment, police brutality. But there's this very strange and seductive way to say, well, if people own more businesses and made more money, then we can solve our nation's race problems.
Mm-hmm. So, I want to talk a little bit more about that. But first, let me go back to the interplay of government and business. So, the governmental policies, I assume you're talking a bit about affirmative action and the financial support for Black businesses in the Nixon administration. So how did that interact? Can you tell us more about how it interacted with McDonald's in terms of either their desire to do social good or their business plans? Like how did that affect how they behaved?
Well, one of the things that's fascinating about Black capitalism then and now, it's one of the few drivers of policy where you can get people on the right and the left together. And so for someone like Nixon, who would not be considered a civil rights president, he loved the idea of Black economic empowerment because it confined the spaces in which this could happen. So it's a pro-segregation argument. It is It's immediate. So you say, I'm going to give funding for more Black-owned businesses, and someone opens a franchise a few months later, right? It's a visible sign of some type of progress. The underwriting process is happening through, at that period, the Office of Economic Opportunity, the Small Business Administration. So there's funds, but it's also very low risk investment. There's a point where these programs really prioritize fast food franchises and other businesses that have proven their concept. And there are a number of Black community leaders who are saying the types of businesses we want to bring into our neighborhoods, small bookstores, small manufacturing, we're not getting the funds for that. It's these huge corporate entities that are low risk investments for the federal government and for those companies. They're the ones who are getting the opportunity. And it actually helps loosen up some bank lending during this time. So economically, it's a very low risk proposition, but the outcomes, right? The visibility of these business and the optics for McDonald's and the other fast food brands to publish ads in Ebony magazine and Black Enterprise and saying, we're building Black millionaires, and we're also employing Black youth, which is a huge issue. We're providing the opportunity. So it's a sleight of hand. And I think that in the US, there's such a dream of having one's own business and seeing it as an extension of your ability to transform communities, even though the data shows small business is not equipped, especially Black-owned businesses, are rarely equipped to do the kind of economic investment we desire in communities. That idea is so strong. Anecdotally, I interviewed a guy whose father had started his own Black-owned fast food chicken franchise. He was on the Pittsburgh Steelers and called it All Pro Chicken. This is like in the 60s, before people really made money in professional sports. And so he said that his dad got a call from Richard Nixon, and Nixon said, hey, open up a chicken restaurant in Cleveland so I can show Black voters what I'm doing. And his dad did it, right? So it's like so immediate, this idea. And it was actually really politically smart, especially for the Republican Party, as they're losing massive amounts of Black support into the 1970s.
Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about how it played out in different areas, right? So the different communities, was it the same in the North and the South at this time?
That's a great question. So, McDonald's is kind of interesting because it's born in California, and there's something very Southern California about fast food. So like In-N-Out, Carl's Jr., McDonald's, they really grow in these places where you have good weather because people are mostly eating outside. You've got the connections of the interstate system. But when Ray Kroc moves the McDonald's headquarters to suburban Illinois, first downtown Chicago and then suburban Illinois, in the Midwest, it has a real resonance. So when the first Black-owned McDonald's happens in Chicago, it makes perfect sense. It is a known entity. But as McDonald's is trying to move into other Black communities, there is a lot of resistance and suspicion to it. And so I talk about in the book, like the Black Panther Party in Portland, they resist McDonald's in their community on the basis of their inability to contribute to the free breakfast program for children. Down in Kansas City and up in Cleveland, there are a lot of fights about McDonald's because there's some questions as to whether they're really authentically Black owned when they operate under the franchise system. In Philadelphia, people don't want McDonald's because they say we already have too much fast food. So there's all of these debates about what fast food is going to mean in Black America. And I wanted to capture that because we've come to a point in our discourse about health and nutrition and fast food and consumption where we've normalized this relationship between Black folks and fast food. But like any market relationship, it has to be cultivated. It has to be manipulated over periods of time. And so there's this real resistance to it. And it isn't until a little later, like in the early 80s, where you see more Black franchise ownership in the South, which becomes a contentious issue for Black entrepreneurs who want to do business in the South. But there's a lot of white resistance to it.
And so here's a question for you. So you seem, if I'm hearing you correctly, you're skeptical a bit of this franchise model in terms of improving the Black community or the communities they're in. But at the same time, they are hiring people. They are having these events. Like you could argue that maybe you were set on your professional path by McDonald's, right? You said that.
I was both nourished physically and intellectually. Listen, I don't fault anyone for trying to make the best decision under duress.
Mhm.
So for these early franchise owners, they could not anticipate the catastrophe of nutrition issues. And they couldn't imagine a world in which their industry pays people poverty wages. And they couldn't anticipate the crisis of childcare. Like they didn't know what they were stepping into, but they did know that they were Black in 1968 and they've been given a golden ticket. I talk about how getting a franchise for these guys in 68 is like if, Zuckerberg decides I should own Meta. None of it makes sense, but I'm going to do it and try to see what I can make out of it.
Mhm.
But with that being said, my critique isn't so much on the individuals who enter the system. It's a kind of ideological position in the United States that business will save communities that have been the most left behind. This is where I will always have a stomach ache. The George Floyd summer was so upsetting for so many reasons. But I think the thing that I found most insulting is that a company committed to expanding Black business, that doesn't save George Floyd's life. And so when we substitute one set of interventions for, business expansion, I think we not only lose sight of the critical problems, it's also incredibly disrespectful, right?
Mhm.
King's legacy isn't a Black-owned McDonald's. King's legacy, right, is the idea that we could have living wages, that we could have healthcare for all, that we could have free college. And so I think that it's these moments in which the co-optation of movement language is used not just only to sell products, but to suggest to people that they are immature or irrational for
Mhm.
imagining robust state intervention in the problems created by the state itself.
Mhm. So, okay, I hear you, and I'm going to push you a little further on this one. So there's an argument that you could be making the perfect enemy of the good. So it's possible that these, I don't, I won't argue for McDonald's in particular, but we'll talk about the McDonald's model for a second.
Mhm.
That they have these franchise models that you are adding wealth to some people in the communities they're in, at least the owners of these franchises. These owners care about the community. They're sponsoring, kids to go to college. They are sponsoring civic events that they could be a positive force in the community. Is it solving all the community's problems? No, probably not. But is it a positive force in the community? And that's where I'm curious. What role do you think it's possible for that model to be successful? Not in solving all the problems, but in being a net positive for the community.
I would say no, just because it's not sustainable. I think philanthropy, I think goodwill is not a policy intervention. It's a way that I want us to live, right? But my pushback to your really good point is that like I think most educated people today would recoil at the idea of trickle down economics as a viable solution to economic inequality. And that is essentially what has been handed to Black communities for centuries, right?
Mhm.
Like you have a really successful funeral homeowner, don't worry. He is going to negotiate for the all Black school. He's going to make sure that people don't get lynched when they get picked up by the police. He's going to give small loans to people who need business. He's going to help you. Well, okay, but that's not, he's unelected. He can abuse that power, but also he's subject to the same forces of Jim Crow that he's helping other people negotiate. And so we see the challenge of this kind of thinking when, for instance, a group of about 50 plus Black franchise owners sued McDonald's in 2020. And they're making the arguments that I talk about in my book that are made in the late 60s, that they allege that McDonald's keeps them out of expanding their businesses outside of Black areas, and that has consequences in terms of the cost of doing business. That in times of crisis like COVID or depopulation in places like Chicago and Detroit, Hurricane Katrina, the places where Black people do business have the higher carrying costs of doing business, even within the franchise system. And so I have interviewed and I've met a lot of Black franchise owners. These are really charitable people. I would never say that these are not people who are invested in community, who don't want to see good things, but they are subject, right, to the same, kind of flawed and racist logics of the market that the people who work for them or the people who depend on them are also under. And so, It's the moment, there was a moment during my book tour before COVID closed everything down. I was flying from Chicago to DC. I was so tired. And I was going to one more book event and I was like crying in like my seat in like American Airlines. I'm sure they were like, what's with this lady? I'm like crying. I'm like, why am I crying? And what I realized is that in the same ways that I'm trying to be critical but empathetic to Black millionaires, right? Like, who's crying for a bunch of Black millionaires who feel aggrieved by McDonald's? It's that same thing. No matter how successful you are in America, when you are Black in America, you will always be reminded of the success that you will not have access to because of your race. And so, in the same ways that I probably have one of the best lives that one could imagine, all things considered, there are still moments in which the racism of the academy and the sexism of the academy and the general kind of, state of affairs, it punches me in the gut too. And so I think this is why, I don't know, if I have to be anything, it's relentless about really discouraging us for imagining a path forward that is through business and through, the generosity and the community connections that even operate in that system.
Gotcha. And so, what role do you think private industry should play in the kind of social inequality qualities that you're talking about? Is there a role for private industry in this space?
They should pay a bunch of taxes and they should be aligned with the best kind of human-centered policy possible. And then that way, McDonald's doesn't have to hear me griping about all these issues anymore. The way that the kind of elite class tells LeBron James to just shut up and dribble, I want businesses to provide goods and services, and I want the rest of us to decide what wages should be and how healthcare works and how much childcare you should get and how free college should be, right? Because I think that if we operate in a kind of morally fair civil society, then businesses can do the things that businesses are trained to do within a regulatory environment that doesn't leave people behind. And so it's like, well, what can business owners do? It's like, well, get together and start to talk to policymakers about job training and about how they're going to really support policies that make people strong workers, right? If you feel like your workforce is only worth $10 an hour, then you should say, well, what does a $25 an hour workforce look like? What do they need to know? Or where do my workers live on these wages? I mean, we both live in parts of the country that are laughably expensive. Yours is still a little bit laughably more expensive than mine, but mine's getting there, right? We live in places where everything is $30, whether it's a banana or it's a gallon of gas. And so I did a fellowship in graduate school at UC Santa Barbara. It was in 2008. And after I left, one of my friends who was there with me, he was like, the whole country is Santa Barbara, right? Gas prices, everything was so expensive. And so, this is where business leaders have to be concerned and put the pressure on. Their solution shouldn't be free gas day at work. Like that's it's like when students are stuck on their dissertation and campuses give them quality time with puppies. It's like, how about better healthcare? And then our PhD students will do a lot better.
So, okay, I hear all that, and that makes sense to me. What happens when the people who are frequenting the businesses demand that the businesses show up in this way? So, I mean, there's a lot of that now, right? There's a demand that you make a statement about this issue, that you show up in the community in this way. And so that becomes part and parcel of doing business. What would you tell someone who's running a business or franchise about that?
I would say, this is an unfortunate result of kind of our lack of kind of trust in civil society, right? The fact that we want a business to say something and we think that that is as meaningful as our elected leaders. It's as meaningful as talking to our neighbors about what they think, right? So if a business says, well, I got to say something, I think you should say, like, I hope you see this moment as an invitation for reflection. We're going to try to reflect as well. And we're going to think about our role and our responsibility in changing. I prefer that than, you go on a website, support. I mean, McDonald's tweeted out Black Lives Matter. I thought I was living in like some upside down world. I had to like watch it several times. McDonald's is tweeting out, why? right? Because they did the market research and knew that they could do that without alienating enough of its base, right? Like, I mean, these decisions are made at the intersection of, I think, heartfelt desire to intervene in the world's problem and a lot of data. And I,
Yes.
and I do wonder if there is a way for McDonald's to say, our nation is in a moment of deep reflection. We're going to take a day off of work and think about ways that we can intervene differently in the world. And we'll get back to you in 6 months because this is not a one-day process. I know you agree with me on that. I mean, like people, I have read
I
your
hear you,
work.
but here's, I'm 100%, but I'm gonna, this is what I do. I'm gonna push again. What happens when your employees are saying, like, how come you aren't saying Black Lives Matter? When the people who come to your franchise are saying, why aren't you saying Black Lives Matter? When, you know,
Tell your employees, like, can you be part of more communities than work and where you buy a burger? And I don't mean that in a hostile way. I think that this is saying something, at the risk of, reintroducing bowling alone to a new generation as the answer. What does it mean when the places we shop and the places we work are the places where we seek and desire this kind of meaningful connection?
mm,
This and I think if your employees say you need to say something, say, okay, well, why don't we think about what we need to say? Why don't we think about who we are? I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. I think the ways we've gone about it have been really wrong. And so I don't think there's anything, I don't think it's inappropriate or bad if people say, I work at a place and I want to know what the values are. But I would say, okay, if your employees have questions about your values, then what the hell were you doing the rest of the year?
mm. So this is a somewhat interesting. I'm going to call it a conservative position.
Uh-huh.
It's like businesses should do business and not worry about these other issues, right? That's their job. And employees should like understand the place they work, but then once they do their job and deal with these other issues elsewhere. Is that fair?
I think that we are a broken society, and I want places to have an elsewhere. I don't fault anyone for wanting to be in places that have a moral response to moral crises. But I do want to push back on this idea of if where we shop and where we work is where we seek it with the most clarity, then
Mm,
there's something wrong. Then we are do then we should take a step back and we need to throw everything out and start over again.
got
Because
it.
you know what I mean? So it's again, I don't want to work at, I mean, listen, I work in higher education, which is like ground zero of bad ideas and misstatements. And sometimes we're on the right side and sometimes we're on the wrong side. I'm not so kind of like ridiculous as to not recognize that. And I want to know that when the George Floyd summer happens, my workplace is not the only place in which I'm in community with other people where I can have meaningful and substantial conversations about what this moment means. And this is what scares me sometimes about the moments of reckoning or, uprising, is that we have no one to turn to but the person in the next cubicle. And often those relationships lack the depth and the quality to survive the ups and downs of it. And so, Brian, I hear you 100%. I mean, I was so immersed. I've had the real privilege as an academic, and very few people get this privilege to be part of many conversations, right? My research went one place, but I got to be part of a lot of public conversations just like you. And I hear from people a deep desire to be engaged in a community where you can make mistakes and be forgiven. And this is what is not what most workplaces are designed to do. And
Mhm.
that's why you have all of the energy for social change in one moment. And then the initiative we came up with, we don't really meet about it. We don't really want to talk about it. Someone's feelings got hurt. Someone cried at a meeting, and then we shut down again. And
Mhm.
so if our workplaces can't be designed to do that kind of work, where is it happening? And
Yeah.
this is what happens when we empower business at this level. Then we expect business to provide a kind of depth of experience that it's not designed to do. And I'm fine with it just doing one thing if I knew that the rest of our communities have spaces where other things can happen.
Mhm. So is it also fair to say, so I mean, I hear you on the community part. So the idea that people's sole source or primary source of community is their place of work is problematic. I hear you saying that. And I guess I'm wondering about what should be their targets for desired change, right? So if you think about private industry or government or civic society, like the places where you gather and live your life, it seems like people believe or seem to think a primary target of their desired social change or whatever interventions they want to have for social change should be private industry, right?
Yeah.
We should target businesses. We should pick it in front of our place of work or in front of some other place, or we should try to get them to stop building this machinery or whatever. Is that misguided? I kind of hear you suggesting that might be misguided as well.
I don't think that the kind of resistance to business is misguided. I think it can be very powerful. Someone who writes about civil rights, if I say, well, boycott is just a waste of time, that's not true. But I think that the two places of concern that I have is that movement leaders who move you in that direction of resisting private industry, they also have a moral responsibility, I think, to movements that they're leading, is to imagine, well, what happens after we win? Right? What happens as we try to still be in this place of transformation? I think that's the first place. But I think we need some clarity on when we appeal to business, what exactly are we asking for and for whom? Because, in my book, I talk about this moment where in the 1980s, where people like Jesse Jackson representing Operation Push and the Reverend Al Sharpton representing the National Action Network, they do these large-scale protests against private business, Coors, McDonald's, KFC, Taco Bell, and you name it. And then when they get to the negotiating table, they negotiate for more Black-owned franchises. They negotiate for deposits in Black banks, hiring more Black attorneys. That's fine. But this could have also been a moment for Black workers as well to say, actually, we want you to make these high-level corporate investments and we want more white-collar folks, but we also know the composition of your workforce. So how are we going to use the power of the boycott and our pressure on market forces to change the nature of fast food work? These are the things that, if we're going to play in this space, that I would like to see more of. Because I think what tends to happen is the kind of pressures that we see and the types of institutions that are targets are just places that open very narrowly open doors for elites to become elites, and that's fine. But what are we going to do with a critical mass of people who are left behind in this political conversation that's often happening at their expense? So we need to engage private business. We need to hold their feet to the fire. But when we get to the negotiating table, I think we really need to reimagine what success looks like.
So I think what drives that often is the idea of a rising tide lifting all boats. And then people might believe they're like, I don't know, they're different lakes, right? So each community has their own, set of boats. So if you lift some, you're going to lift the rest of the people in that community. And you find that, it sounds like you find that argument uncompelling. Is that fair?
I find it dangerous. I'm always in a tough position because I'm such a critique of ideas like the American dream, and I completely live the American dream. So I'm not again, there's a level of self-awareness to what I say. I have had an incredible set of opportunities that are unmatched, that are unimaginable to the critical mass of people who came before me in my own family line. I recognize that. Have I socially transformed anything as a result of my individual success? Absolutely not. I haven't. I think I've helped a lot of family members. I've been able to donate to causes that are important. My son is going to have a set of experiences that I could not imagine growing up. But, big effing deal. Congratulations. Congratulations. You've class ascended. This is worth 0 for human history and the impact I need to have as a person, in my opinion. There's a lot to celebrate, but there's a lot still ahead. And when we are unable to separate the two, we get into the kind of false practices of opportunity. Do you know what I mean? That we can do both at the same time. We can celebrate individual wins and say, okay, to what ends? There's stuff on the other side of it. And I think that's where I think business and industry, that's when I think they do their most disingenuous work. And, in my research, I see all of these really compelling stories of Black franchise owners who've done incredible things. That's great. But this is not going to fundamentally undo the system that imperiled them in the first place.
I see. So basically, you're saying like what you think of as anomalous success. I would say that's how you're describing yourself. Like, this is not to be expected. An anomalous success increases in those, surprising events doesn't change anything about the background in which the background kind of challenges in society.
I mean, the best it can do is like, it's like this question of like voices at the table. Like if I'm on a board, maybe I make the one snarky comment that makes people feel a little bit bad and we're like, okay, maybe we should, and that is worth something, but that is not the sum total of transformation. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Mhm.
and I think the spaces in which I've existed have sold me that this is how you do it. When I was a PhD student at Brown, Ruth Simmons was the first Black woman to head an Ivy League school. I think that had significant impact in higher education and the Ivy League. I really do. But there is a mechanism of thought that makes me think that this is like all the demand needs to be. Like she was there and she did some pretty cool things. It's like, no, no, no. She did these cool things. And I'm going to still ask you, like, why aren't, colleges and universities paying their fair share in taxes? Like, what does it mean when we engage workers on a campus? Like, I still have questions for you. And I think that's what I think we do our best work as educators, where we tell students like, yes, there's so much to be proud of, but what kind of critical questions are you asking? And are you going to be relentless in the pursuit of those questions? Because I think that, the reason why capitalism is so successful, it's so seductive. I think that there's a body of literature that is all about, saying capitalism is terrible. It's like a body of literature that says fast food is terrible, but fries are delicious. Like you will never see me say that fries are not so good to eat. I get that, right? Like I'm not one of these people who denies that reality, but I want French fries to be produced by people who don't come to work sick and don't worry about who's taking care of their kids. And I don't like fries shouldn't be 5 cents. They're not anymore, but there was, fries should not be discounted to 99 cents because if that's not the value of the work that gets put into it, we need to talk about that. But I'm not going to lie to you and say fries aren't delicious. And I'm not going to suggest that capitalism isn't effective because it is seductive. But we have to be brave enough to say yes, and then we still have a set of questions and demands.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's true. Capitalism is certainly seductive for a number of reasons, but it's also true that it's lifted a lot of people out of poverty.
100%. At what cost?
I hear you.
At what cost? I mean, again, it is always so complicated, and I think it's hard. But I mean, I think I was talking to on Ellie Goldsworthy about this. She had asked me about changing your mind. I mean, God bless people who do work about like bipartisanship and thinking and people coming together when they disagree, because I can be such a pain. But she said, what did you change your mind about? And I said, capitalism, because I knew it was bad, but I don't think I realized just how bad it was. Because it isn't just a system, an economic system, it is a set of ideology and practices that I think disconnect us from our most like vital human self. And I feel it every day. Like, I love the internet. I'm not going to deny the seductive quality of the internet. The internet is constantly trying to suggest that I need more things when I do not, that I am so worthless that more things will make me more of what I desire myself to be. Every day is a fight against that. And anytime you think you're smarter than the advertisers, the algorithm will provide you something that will be, they're smarter than, right? Like I'm a middle-aged woman. Everything that I am given via the internet is how to camouflage my body and how to look younger or more interesting than I actually am. It is amazing. Everything is, you are so worthless. Here's some ways to help.
Everyone can always use a little bit of help. What are we gonna say?
I don't know. It's funny. My husband and I talk about our what Instagram gives us, and for him, it's a lot of like dad life hacks. It's an assumption that he's a bad parent, and so he needs hacks. That he needs to lift weights and prepare foods in a certain way, and he needs to build things. That's like what he gets. And I get like, you're middle-aged, please wear these clothes so people hate you less. And then, you're a parent, so you have nothing out, like, so this is how you manage your life. You should wake up early. And I am victim to all of it. I'm like, maybe I should be waking up early.
Yeah, I'm going to say right now, on that one, I refuse. I refuse. And anyone who thinks they're morally superior because they get up in the morning, they can keep it. They can get it.
And I'm a 4:30 a.m. I'm a 4:30 a.m. critique of capitalism kind of person. I know better. I wrote an entire book about it, and I'm like, you know what? That 4:45 wake up makes me a better person in this. So, we are all and I think we have to have a sense of humor about it. We have to be radically honest about it, and then we have the tools to confront it.
So here's a question I have for you. I have two more questions. First, do you still eat McDonald's? When was the last time you had McDonald's?
2000. Last time I ate at a McDonald's was 2005.
Wow. Okay.
And I'll tell you about that. I think French fries are delicious. I think McDonald's has some really good products. I think that with the emergence of fast casual, and the fact that we can get more prepared foods everywhere. I talk about this in class all the time. My students are tired of me talking about it. But when rotisserie chicken hit the market, it changed everyone's life. Remember when we were kids, if someone had to roast a chicken, it was like all day. And then a roasted chicken became available to you and everyone lost their mind. And because we couldn't get hot food, and then food got better. Like when we were kids, food was fine, but then it got really good. And NAFTA made some foods cheaper. Like our ability to access lots of different types of foods has just exploded. So eating McDonald's is now a little more gauche for a younger generation because I think they can eat more interesting foods. And then fast casual gives you the impression that you're eating something really healthy when you're not, right? Like it's all a mind game. So I stopped eating McDonald's in 2005 because I saw that documentary Super Size Me, which has now been kind of discredited, but I was like so afraid because in grad school, I ate at McDonald's all the time. So I haven't had McDonald's in decades, but I now have a 2.5-year-old and he has had McDonald's a few times.
I feel like the advertising has not worked. It hasn't shamed you into keeping your kid out of McDonald's.
I don't take him. But here's the thing. I exist in a world where other people spend time with my kid. And when he's hungry, they're happy to take him to McDonald's. And I don't think that that's not the worst thing in the world. But as he gets older, what I want to teach him about McDonald's and about the world is that we make all sorts of choices all the time. And we try to make the best choice we can under the circumstances. And I just want him to be a discerning person. I want to talk to him about when a person works in a McDonald's, this is what they have to do. And sometimes it's unfair because when mommy goes to work, she isn't told when she can go to the bathroom. And she makes enough money so that we don't have to worry about certain things. And when people work at McDonald's, sometimes they have to. And we don't like that. And, and if he eats a hamburger, it's okay. But we think a lot about kind of what it takes to make a hamburger. And we have to make a lot of different choices. Like, I'm not here to ruin the kid's entire life. Like he's got a lot of opportunities to find that I will ruin other things. But I do think that having kind of thoughtful conversations about market decisions with our kids moves them away from this idea that there's certain types of inequality that's just inevitable. Right. So by the time that they get to our classrooms, we don't have to make the case. They're willing to engage in the complexity of the issue.
Mm-hmm. All right, here's the last question.
Okay.
So what would you want to leave people with, or what's the most important thing in your mind about the tensions between civic society, private industry, and government?
Don't give up on us so quickly. I think that there has been this very, and we can trace it to a lot of different historical moments, and historians, often trace it to Watergate. But I think the sentiment has a lot of, places in which it emerges that government is automatically bad or inefficient or incompetent. The idea that we can't trust or have faith in each other. So because business makes a lot of money, then business is the smartest. This is the strangest kind of contradiction. As often as we see the stories of white collar fraud, of broken promises, of crypto, of tech, of the banking industry. We see a lot of private industries fail. They're just given more grace than the rest of us. And so I think that what we have to do is push back on this impulse that business is more efficient and smarter. People in business are more efficient and smarter. You have to elect people who have business experience because they can lead better. Like all of these presuppositions, it's like I heard this talk once, which was so good. It was this idea about like why we don't have a more diverse set of actors in medicine and STEM. And someone said you don't need an A+ in physics to be a good doctor, and you don't need a 4.0 from a school like Stanford or Penn to be a person who can be to contribute to science. But we have decided that what makes mastery possible between the ages of 18 and 22 are these things, and this is the world we get. Like, we have to be more expansive in our vision. And so when we talk about the problems of social inequality, racism, how to eradicate poverty, just because someone runs a business doesn't mean that they know better than the people who've experienced it and survived it. And so let's not decide who is disqualified from solving problems. And let's remember that when we talk about the common good, we actually have resources from the common trust to respond to it. That, McDonald's needs to improve their burgers. Their French fries are fantastic, and let them do that. And then I can worry about diabetes screenings, and I can worry about making sure we have a tax base so that people don't have to worry about where their kids are after school and that they have paid sick leave. Like, we can do that for each other. And then these businesses can get better because they're not perfect. And when's the last time you bought something, you're like, how did a hole get in here? Like, they can work on making better t-shirts, and I can decide how my neighbor can live with dignity regardless of how much money they make. And I think we have to remind people that we actually have the tools to take care of each other.
Yeah, well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. It was fun.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.